before I move any further, I want to acknowledge that, as Ezra mentioned, this was a collaborative effort. So I had 3 other artists work on painting this with me and designing components of the mural, and then of course a couple other assistants who came and helped, and then you all who came and helped paint as well. So there was about 10 or so people who worked on painting this mural, which is really cool. And of course, 3 other artists that helped design it. Those were Corey Fader, Norma Chaires Hartel, and Giselle Monsiváis. And they're all local artists who do their own work as well, but I brought them in because a lot of the work they already do is related to imagery that I thought would fit well in the themes we were working with. And so we worked on this piece, and then on these 2 east and west panels, we have a depiction of the relationship between Ursa Major and Cassiopeia as they circumambulate the North Star, which is a pretty nifty seasonal calendar to observe, and it's one that's been depicted in various forms of pottery as well. And so looking at how those constellations have been a timekeep for different people around the world, and how we can still use that today to determine what season we're in if it wasn't already obvious. And then of course I put little images of things that represent those appropriate seasons. And so here in New Mexico, of course, we get a migration of bald eagles in the winter that come down, not as far as Las Cruces, but they go down as far as the TOC area. And then of course an Oya for rainwater catchment for the summer that has a thundercloud image on it. And so on these 2 opposing walls, you'll see that. And then of course, on this south-facing wall, we have a depiction of a petroglyph that's just outside of Socorro, New Mexico. And so this petroglyph was from the Pueblo formative era, and it's a glyph that very clearly depicts a comet and or maybe asteroid, but it's unmistakable. You know, when you do a lot of like consultation on various sites, sometimes there's a good amount of guessing that goes on in what things are being depicted. And I've been in situations where I've been called to go and consult on various sites with other tribal historians and cultural know-it-alls or whatever. And sometimes people are just throwing guesses as to what the images are representing. But here I picked one that's, you know, absolutely astronomical in some way, that is a pretty cool one. It's one that I thought was cool to depict too, because it's actually not really accessible to the public. It's not part of any sort of park or trail, and it's one that I think, you know, is, despite how cool it is as a way of telling a story of astronomical observation in New Mexico, it's not a very well known one. And so that's what you'll see on this panel. A traditional New Mexican sun design. On this side with some clouds, and on the opposing side I have a lunar scape, and so the moon depicted there. This entire entryway was painted by Giselle, who was one of the artists that I mentioned who came and worked on it. And she was really inspired by astronomical illustrations from the medieval to proto-Renaissance, and I think some of them are late Renaissance as well, but she kind of looked at some of that iconography and made this. We've been arguing about this since I started this mural. I don't know what this entryway is called, but whatever this this part of the room is called, she painted the stars and this imagery on this part, which is really cool. And then Corey and I did these nebulae that are on the top of these 2 opposing walls as well. And then, of course, to bring back some of the imagery and the stories that are connected to them, we have these 2 large panels, which, of course, reference sky and water, because I think sky and water really tied together a lot of what I was looking at when it comes to reconciling these bigger questions about considering stories of history, and of course some of the most apt symbols to succinctly encapsulate how we understand those stories in our relationship to the natural world. And so there's the constellation of Aquarius for the water bearer, and then of course the Pleiades for this eagle. And the Pleiades is a constellation that has many times been documented in various archaeological sites around New Mexico, Chaco being one of them. The architecture there corresponds to the alignment of the Pleiades, and so there's cool things to look at when it comes to exploring New Mexico and seeing what we're looking at in these different glyphs and depictions and even places of habitation or gathering. And then of course, the star of the show, the black hole, is right there around the fire escape. That was a request that we were happy to do. That's exactly what it is, so don't question it. And then, of course, our friend Norma painted this turtle that's above everyone's head. And the reason the turtle is depicted is because the turtle shell itself is a really good lunar calendar. It's really sufficient at helping people keep track of the moon cycles, because the larger part of the carapace has 13 sections, which relate to 13 full moons, or 13 full moon cycle, and then the smaller little sections around the turtle enumerate the same amount of days in a lunar month. And so you could use a turtle shell as a moon calendar, and so I had Norma come in and paint a turtle moon calendar on the ceiling for everyone. And then of course, Corey painted this Andromeda galaxy right here that sits at the center. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. And is that, yeah, the moon, the lunar scape. I think I mentioned the lunar scape. Yeah, the lunar scape is there. But honestly, I can talk about so much more, and I really want to do that with you all. So I think right now the best thing to do is see if anyone has any questions for me about any of the iconography or the process or anything else of interest that you think I might have an answer for. But yeah, I want to say thank you to all of you, of course, and my gratitude, of course, is extended to Ezra and Jason for getting this thing going. And it's been a wonderful time, being here, getting to talk to everyone. It's been so great, actually. Everyone's been so nice. Even, people walking by have stopped and said such lovely things, and everyone here has been so sweet. I mean, you all know who you are. You've stopped and chatted with me and said nice things. We've had discussions. I think Ezra and I had a discussion about partial differential equations or something the other day. I don't know.
Oh, you did.
Ezra asked me if I thought math is a universal language, right? So of course it got into a big long discourse. But on that note, thank you all. Seriously, it's been great. And I loved going on the hike with you all too last weekend. That was a lot of fun. Are there any questions? If not, that's okay too. But, good, all right. Yeah, this one. Corey, what is the name of this one? It's, yeah. We Googled pictures of cool nebula.
There's a lot of blocks around it.
Yeah.
I see it everywhere.
What's that?
Is that the Whirlpool Galaxy?
Yeah.
Probably, yeah, I mean,
Looks like.
I'll say yes, yeah. I should know better. I have a really good memory, but sometimes when you just glance at things and you don't really, I look more at the picture than I did at the name of it.
Yeah.
It's actually
I think it's empty.
Yeah,
You think it is individual?
yeah.
It looks. I think
Nice.
there's another Hubble picture that looks like that, but it's not in 50.
Yeah. One of the really funny things I remember about reading about the 1680 comet, because I was really intrigued by this Pope story and his Pueblo Revolt connection to the stars. But I guess in Rome, a chicken laid a really funky egg, like a really weird egg that had a weird pattern on it, and they're like, "Oh, this must be connected to the comet." And so it was cool to read about how people are always trying to draw connections between what's happening light years away and what's happening in someone's chicken coop. Yeah. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah.
I guess, is there anything we should know about the person that we chose?
Yeah, like I said, I wanted to find a way to depict our relationship to water and air, and I thought, what better way to do that than the tradition of water bearing here in in the Southwest and its relationship to pottery, right? Pottery making culture comes from a time when, the scarcity of water became an instigator for cultural change. And to this day, the tradition of pottery has a direct connection to people's relationship to water and collecting and gathering water. And so I thought it would be appropriate to use that imagery and connect it to imagery that relates to water and the stars and how that ties the story back to New Mexico. So, good question. Any other questions or comments or concerns?
I do have one
Yeah.
question. So with the iconography here, we just have a random eye in the middle.
Yeah.
What's the significance of the...
Yeah, that was Giselle's choice. She painted this pattern work, and I think she just wanted to kind of. We didn't really have any references to the observer. Like, a lot of. I mean, astronomy without the observer is just the stars existing, right? It's not really. They're just there. The observation of them is what makes astronomy astronomy. And so I think having that eye was her way of kind of having a tie-in to the observational aspect of our relationship to everything out there. That's a good question, though.
I like that.
Yes?
Minor question, but it looks to be 6 spikes around the star.
Yeah.
Did you choose that number for a certain reason?
No, I mean, that's just what I painted the stars like because it was fun. Yeah, I mean, that's just a aesthetic choice, I suppose. There wasn't any sort of scientific reason behind the light flares in the stars.
It looks pretty sad.
Yeah, thank you.
So the constellations, right, the 50-year Aquarius and Pleiades,
Yeah.
these are more so like you chose those constellations for their significance, what the meaning of the constellation is, but the actual depiction of like the eagle
Yeah.
and the water, right? Those aren't necessarily like because like people have been interpreting constellations in so
Right.
many different ways, right? Wherever you go to your state,
Yeah.
this was actually an alligator.
Right.
What we thought, this was.
Right.
And so that wasn't, so those aren't necessarily related to the actual constellations themselves. This is like the connection between
Right.
them.
And that's a really good question because there's been multiple theories when it comes to different pots that people have found. A lot of the times they do have some sort of constellation reference, but you can't really make it out all the time, right? And there are so many different figures and animals and so on that people use to reference the constellations. And so there wasn't you didn't have a complete and concise zodiac necessarily that was consistent amongst different communities. And so you'll have varying depictions that reference the same constellation in different communities. And so, no, it's not like that's a good question though. The eagle wasn't ever used in a pot or a glyph to reference the Pleiades, but it fit really nicely with where the stars were placed, and it made sense for what I was doing to tie it back to relationship to place. Because I mean, when it comes to wanting indigeneity, we're not going to hash that out, it's complex. But when it comes to talking about indigeneity in general, I mean, most people's understanding of indigeneity is connection to place, right? And so if it wasn't for that relationship to begin with, then it wouldn't be really any point to discussing indigeneity. And so I think, the stars are kind of exonerated from having to deal with the politics of indigeneity, but in this I brought them into the argument so they can add their voice too.
Nice.
Cool, any other questions?
Diego, y'all did an amazing job. We're
Thank
so
you.
grateful. Thanks.